fantastic to have heard Andy's story and to catch a little glimpse of what Red Frogs does. And if you have missed it up to this point, we're talking about parties today. And, the theme of today's service is Jesus was a party guy. Now, the thing is, though, we talk about parties. Humans are people who like to celebrate. We like to celebrate all sorts of things. We like to celebrate the fact that we finished year 12. That's what Schoolies is all about. We like to celebrate milestones in our life, events that have happened. We like to celebrate relationships, to meet with people. We have national holidays about things that we celebrate. We have birthdays and weddings and sporting events. We just heard again, an 1818, we'll take that as a win. We'll celebrate all sorts of things. And Aussies are like anybody. We really love to celebrate events and celebrate things. To celebrate is human. My sister recently celebrated her 50th birthday. What's frightening to me is that she's my sister and she turned 50, which means I'm not far behind. So I figure that this is a frightening thing, but it's worth celebrating. So much so that my parents thought worth getting on a plane, flying all the way over to Ireland where she lives and celebrating with her. Last year we celebrated our 30th anniversary as a church. And when I graduate from my current studying program, I'm telling you, there is going to be a celebration. We should celebrate. And Jesus was no stranger to celebration too. In fact, in one of the eyewitness accounts of Jesus, written by one of his disciples named John, in the very early part of the book, we find him at a party. He's actually got baptized by John. He's taken a little moment to invite some disciples to follow him. But the next scene that we find him at, he's sitting at a party with his disciples and his family. It's a wedding party, a great celebration. And here he is. He didn't just come to the party, but he also contributed some of the wine for the guests to drink. Now that might surprise you about Jesus, that Jesus actually wasn't just at the party, but he supplied the alcohol. It seems a little bit strange as we think about it from our cultural point of view, but this is what Jesus did. Now I want to take you to the actual story in the Bible and read it to you. It's from the book of John. And here's what it says. It says, "The next day there was a wedding celebration in a village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, 'They have no more wine.' 'Dear woman, that's not our problem,' Jesus replied. 'My time has not yet come.' But his mother told the servants, 'Do whatever he tells you.' Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, 'Fill the jars with water.' When the jars had been filled, he said, 'Now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies.' So the servants followed his instructions. And when the master of ceremonies tasted the water, that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, although of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. 'A host always serves the best wine first,' he said. 'Then when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you've kept the best until now.' This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." There's no doubt that Jesus knew something about parties. He knew about what to do at a party, he knew about what was important at a party, and he knew how to celebrate some things. To me, this is one of the great stories about Jesus that helps us understand how much he was like us and how much he was like God. It's this God-man mixed together, and Jesus not only attended the party, but contributed to the party. Now, the unfortunate thing about parties, as we've heard this morning, is that they don't always end on a happy note. The initial reason for the party is this great reason to celebrate, a coming of age, and yet sometimes things start off well, but they don't end as well as they could. Sometimes they get out of hand. Thankfully, there are people like Andy Goulet and Red Frogs who work with these kind of problems and offer hope to people who need hope. We know there's nothing wrong with a party. Even Jesus enjoyed them. And there are many ways to celebrate, but sometimes it can get out of hand. That's probably the reason why when I say to you, Jesus was a party guy, many of you find that difficult. Because sometimes what we do is we compare, we take the party side of things and then the consequences of taking it too far. And when we talk about it, often we think of Jesus he wouldn't be in part of the consequences part, He would just be a part of the early part. And sometimes it confuses us, specifically as Christians, when we think Jesus was a party guy. But just like Red Frogs, Jesus was a man who concentrated on people. In some ways, Jesus was the first representative of Red Frogs. He went to parties, and what he brought was love. If you were here last week, you'll have heard me mention that very fact. Jesus said he came for people who needed him, and not for those who had it all together. And that was the very reason he attended a particular party that we read about in the book of Matthew, another eyewitness of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, recorded there in the Bible. And it says there, sometimes this party is referred to as Matthew's party. And this eyewitness account of Jesus' life talks about this story. Matthew was a tax collector, and as I mentioned last week as well, tax collectors in that society were considered to be pretty much the low of the low because they collected taxes for the Roman government in a Jewish society, and they taxed the people, and sometimes they taxed them too much because that's how they got paid, and they pocketed a little bit extra. And so a ruthless tax collector would pocket a whole lot of money of yours that he shouldn't. And in a way, you sort of thought to them, they're just like scum, So this person's considered the lowest of the lows. And Jesus, he was at a party with scum. In a way, this is the way they were described. It says it wasn't just with one tax collector, but with many. And with other disreputable people, as it says in the Bible. Let's read what it says in Matthew 9, verse 10. It says, later Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with scum? The Pharisees, they were the religious leaders of the day, and they were the super church people. They stood at a distance and offered everyone advice about how things should be done. And so it wasn't any surprise to people that they offered some advice about this particular party. But the way they described them, you've got to listen to that, is they described these people as scum. In other words, the party that Jesus attended with these people, the religious people thought it was the wrong place for him to go. And you've got to understand that at the time, the Pharisees were trying to figure out if Jesus was really the Messiah, God's representative, God's son here on earth, the king who was coming to rescue them. And the problem they had was they thought the people there were scum, and if God was on their side, how was it possible that he would actually meet with these people who were to be pushed to the side and to the margins? It's a bit of a strange event that sounds a lot similar to the way some Christians would talk today, don't you think? They'd say, you know what, those people, we don't like them, we don't want to hang around with them, they're kind of like the scum, and why would God have anything to do with them? Some Christians actually talk like that today. Why do you hang with people we don't like? But you have to know something about Jesus. He isn't like the other religious leaders. He doesn't write people off because they're not perfect. He doesn't disassociate himself with them because they are not like him. He doesn't point his finger at those people right on the margins of faith. Not Jesus. He actually goes to where they are. And he offers them hope. Instead of condemning them, he meets with them, shows them love, and offers them hope. Let's see what happens in the next part of the story about Matthew's party. Verse 12, chapter 9 of Matthew, it says, when Jesus heard the Pharisees say that he was eating with scum, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn what the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call those who think not to call those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. To me, this is awesome. Here is Jesus attending a party that most religious people would not even be seen dead at. And instead of agreeing with the description that the religious people gave of them, that the people were scum, he recognizes they need help. In fact, he can see straight through the religious people, and in effect he says, you guys think you have it all together. You point your finger at everyone else. Well, you are right. You're not ever going to really need me, are you? In fact, I didn't come to earth to prop up your religious system, your system of discrimination and piety. I came for people who really need me. I came for people who really need my help. Does that surprise you? The Son of God comes to earth, and instead of being stuck up in a church, and instead of having private parties with the most pious people on earth, he spent his time with the people the religious leaders described as scum. He attends a party where the room is full of these type of people. You better believe it. This is what Jesus is like. And in fact, the Jesus we love today as Christians has not changed one little bit from those moments back then. He would still rather spend his time with people who need him and acknowledge their need of him than he would spend with the most religious and pious people on earth. But let me just clarify a couple of things today. The first is that the words sinner and scum, these were applied by the Jewish religious elite of the day. It's not the truth about these people. They weren't scum. Jesus didn't see them that way, but this was a list of people the Pharisees didn't like. And I mean, there's a real lesson for those in the church, isn't there, in this way, is that we don't start pointing the finger at people that we don't like, calling them scum. And the real lesson for those people not in the church is that if you've ever been told that you're worth nothing by someone in the church, remember, that's not what Jesus would say. He would love you and want to help you. Second, when Jesus didn't want anything to do with religious people, he wasn't saying he didn't want anything to do with people of faith or people who had a spirituality. The key here was attitude. He was saying, I am there for you if you need me. Well, if you acknowledge your need for me. You know, there are people in the church, I mentioned this last week, there are people in the church who really don't need God. They think they have it all together, and they say, God, we don't really need you. And God kind of says, well, you know what? You're self-sufficient. What do you need me for? You don't need me. He's close to those people who acknowledge their need for him. But you can be outside the church and have the same attitude. I don't really need God. It would be just the same religious spirit inside or outside the church. But who God is for the people who say, I need God. I acknowledge my need of him. Jesus was saying, if you need me, I'm there for you. It's when you become self-sufficient and puffed up with your own efforts that I don't have time for you. So no matter if you're a Christian or a non-Christian, Jesus will always have time for you if you acknowledge your need for him. That's why Jesus said, I came for the sick, not the healthy. He was saying he wasn't saying the religious leaders were healthy. He was saying they didn't need him and that the people at the party did. Do you need Jesus today? One thing's for sure. While some people in the church may avoid you, Jesus would not. He breaks the religious rules and offers hope to all. And I think I can demonstrate this by telling you another story from the Bible about a guy at a dinner party. And this party was a one-on-one party with Jesus. His name was Zacchaeus. It's a more personal party, a private kind of party with someone who was the outcast of society. Just the kind of party Jesus likes to attend. And it's the party that Jesus held. It was with a guy named Zacchaeus, I said, and it comes from a book called Luke, another one of the eyewitness accounts of Jesus, written by one of his disciples, recorded in the Bible. And here's what it says. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region and had become very rich. If you take what I said before, chief tax collector, very rich. You know that he's ripping a few people off. That's how he got rich. That's why he was considered to be lowest of the low. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. "He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much." Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." Once again, we find Jesus seeking out someone on the fringe, someone who had the religious leaders disliked. And he wants to have a dinner party with him. Can you imagine the fuss? This short guy, despised by the people, getting a front row seat with Jesus? It just isn't the way some religious people like to look at that kind of thing. They'd like to think that they had the first choice of the front row seat. How is this possible, Jesus? Who is supposed to be the Savior of the whole world? How could you choose a person like this to be so intimate with? But I'm figuring at this point, you get it. Of all people, you understand what's going on here. And you can see it. You can see right through it. Jesus is saying, I didn't come for the people at the front of the crowd, the tall people, the handsome people, the people who already think they're good enough or better. Jesus is saying, I came for the people who actually acknowledge that they need me. And I want you to think about that crowd that day. From the people surrounding Jesus, the hum and the busyness, to Zacchaeus up the tree. And I want to ask you this question. Where do you picture yourself? Whereabouts are you in the crowd? Are you just hanging around, checking it out, not trying to be noticed? Are you one of the people wondering how Jesus could even spend his time with people like that? Are you Zacchaeus up the tree, trying to get a glimpse of Jesus, but too afraid to approach, too challenged in some way, not willing to push yourself to the front? Are you the kind of person who would condemn those on the fringe, or are you more of the person who thinks there's no way God would have anything to do with me? I'm too bad. I'm too aloof. I'm too sinful for him to even care about. Have you ever found your place in that crowd? Have a think about it. Where are you? Now I want you to imagine Jesus walking along and stopping and turning and looking through the crowd. And I want you to imagine his eyes fall on you. You know, you could be at the front of the crowd, you could be in the middle of the crowd, you could be just like Zacchaeus up the tree. And Jesus looks at you. Even now, I want you to imagine that he does that. And he says to you, would you come? Can I come to your place for dinner? Can just you and me have a party? Would you accept the invitation if he did? Or would you try to hide so that he asks someone else? You see, as I said before, Jesus wasn't simply rejecting people of faith. He was rejecting people who thought they had it all together. Now, you could be in the church or not in the church, and Jesus would still be interested in meeting with you. So have you found your place in that crowd? Have you heard him say to you, let's meet, you and me? And I just want to imagine for a minute that you said yes. Okay, Jesus, let's go to my place. Maybe you'd send a message ahead of time, please clean up You know, the few things that need to be scooched under the carpet, a couple of things that could be deleted from the computer, maybe some things that could be hidden. But you'd say, okay, God, I want you to imagine you said, yes, come to my place, just you and me. And I want you to imagine you're sitting there, just you and Jesus at the dinner table. And I want you to think to yourself, what would Jesus say to you? What would he say to you? How would he approach you? He's the one that's invited you to dinner. What's he got to say to you? You know, we actually don't know what Jesus said to Zacchaeus. It's just not recorded there in the Bible. And I reckon what happened was, you know, this recording here was because there were eyewitnesses to this. So they said, well, Jesus did this and he did this and he did this. And all of a sudden when it comes to that dinner party with Zacchaeus, there's nothing written down. I reckon it's because there was only Zacchaeus and Jesus in there. And that was a private conversation that wasn't recorded in the Bible. And I wonder what Jesus would say to you in a moment like that. We don't know what he said actually to Zacchaeus. We do know what happened to Zacchaeus because after the dinner meeting with Jesus, here's what happened, and we read it already in Luke 19, verse 8. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. We don't know what Jesus said to him, but we do know this. After the party, the tax collector, who was considered the scum of the earth, who had basically ripped people off right, left, and center to the point where he had feathered his own nest, become rich and wealthy. After one dinner meeting with Jesus, he turned his life completely around to the point where he said, I have to change something about who I am. I have to let God have my life. I have to give back what I've cheated people on. I will choose to do something different. And I wonder what it would be like for you. Jesus meets with you. You know, and I just want you to think for a minute. What would he say if he met with you? And then what would you do? Then what would you do? What would change? Because the truth about Zacchaeus was that an encounter with Jesus, that private encounter, that private party, if you like, with Jesus, had such an impact on Zacchaeus' life that he turned around. It's kind of like the word we use in the church called repentance. It's this idea that you turn from something you were to something you are. And I think actually Jesus, when he encounters all of us, that's what happens to us. We recognize there are some things that don't really line up with the way Jesus is. And we choose at that point when we've encountered Jesus to turn and say, no, I choose to be a follower of you. You know, what that's called is called salvation. It's interesting that Jesus was saying he wants to meet everyone. He wants to meet them exactly where they are, no matter what they've done. And in that meeting, he wants to speak to you about your life and offer you hope. A hope that leads you to make the kind of changes that Zacchaeus did. Jesus called it salvation, and it's written here in the story in Luke 19:9, where it says, Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, he's talking about himself, Jesus, came to seek and save those who are lost. He was saying, you have to think about this. He was saying, you religious leaders, you think you've got it all together. In fact, to tell us how altogether you've got it, you describe yourselves as being the true sons of Abraham, that you are the right descendants of Abraham himself. And you piously stand up and you pronounce to people who they are and where they should go and how good you are. But here's this guy, the scum of the earth in your eyes, after one dinner party with me, is more of a son of Abraham than you are. Can you imagine that? How that would have gone down in the thinking of those Pharisees. They were priding themselves on their connection with God and how great they were and how bad the tax collector was. And yet after one encounter with Jesus, Jesus says that tax collector gets it. He gets it. He gets it. It's not about your religious piety. It's not about how smart you think you are. It's about a relationship with me. That transforms your life. You need to imagine that what happened when Zacchaeus came out of that meeting with Jesus, and when he stood up and said he would return 4 times what he had taken, the Jews of the day would have had their brains explode. They would have just gone, hang on, this doesn't fit our caricature of a tax collector. All of a sudden, he's done some things which don't even fit the life of a tax collector. We can't judge him anymore. Suddenly, he's been changed. And this is the truth about Jesus. Jesus takes you from a place where you are perhaps outcast from everybody else, and he says, no, you can now jump, right, catapult right over those who think they have faith to a point of faith with me. That's the amazing thing about God. And that's the thing we love about God. And it's not often mentioned. Jesus came for people who needed him most. In fact, it's those people who acknowledged him most. They said, yes, we need you. And when they approached him with their need, then he gave them opportunity to be everything that he wanted them to be. It changed their life. You know, it's a bit radical, isn't it? Jesus can meet with anyone who wants him and bring such a change to their life, salvation to the point where they can jump right over those who think they have it all together. So let's return to that moment at the dinner party, just you and Jesus. What would you say to Jesus? You've heard what he said to you. What would you say to him? And how would you respond? Today is no different than a day when Zacchaeus was up the tree. Jesus wants to meet with you and help you change your life. He wants to take you from being outcast to being his friend. He wants to take you from being self-sufficient to being God-sufficient. It doesn't matter what religious people say or think. It matters what Jesus thinks. And he thinks you're okay. He thinks he can help you. He knows he can offer you something. The question is, will you invite him in? Will you let him change you? This is the way of salvation. And what I'd like you to do this morning is you will have received the communication card. We talked about it before. If you will grab it out, on the back of the communication card, you'll see a spot there where you can respond. You know you can write your name, your address, your connection details there. You could write a prayer point. You could write a praise point. You could write something about the air conditioning or something about the message. But right there on the back of that card, there's a little circle that you could tick that says, I'd like to invite Jesus to meet me just like he met with Zacchaeus. I'd like to invite Jesus to meet with me just like he met with Zacchaeus. And if that's you, you can tick that box today. This is a way to say, I'd like to experience the kind of salvation that came to that house that day. I'd like to experience the kind of transformation that came to Zacchaeus that day. By ticking that box, you're saying, that's what I'd really like. And if that's not you today, you might be interested in Christianity and what Christianity is about. And we're running a Christianity Explained course from November 25th for 5 weeks. And you can tick that box there as well, and we can send you some information about that course. We're going to close, and in closing, I'm going to ask the band to come. We're going to have a special item to close. And I want you to listen to this song as it's sung. The words of this song is a song by Casting Crowns. Talk about how Jesus finds us where we are and offers us mercy. How we are broken and we need Jesus. And Jesus wants to offer us hope and rest. And it's kind of like a prayer and it's kind of like a hope. It's like Jesus speaking to you and you speaking to Jesus. Well, you could say to him and imagine in a way this could be your private meeting with Jesus, where he says, I'll take you as you are, wherever you are. And you could respond and say, thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your mercy in your own private way.